Some people don't die from bullets. They die from silence. From walking past what they should have faced. From turning a blind eye to the cries for help. And perhaps at some point you've wondered how much that silence has taken from you and what is the price you pay. Jake Morrison knew that kind of death. For years, that silence had haunted him inexorably. Welcome to Neural Hearts. Let's get started. That morning was no different from any other. A broken trail marker, a mile of rocky wilderness. But then, across the clearing, a strange sight appeared. A wagon broken down, abandoned. Its axle snapped. One wheel leaning, the other still spinning slowly in the wind, creaking like brittle bones breaking. Jake pulled his horse to a halt. Trouble in the wilderness did not always give warning, but this silence was too unnatural. He stepped down, his boots sinking into pine needles and moss. The canvas cover over the wagon shifted in the wind, revealing a torn scrap of cloth, the edge of a woman's dress. Jake pulled the cover aside. What he saw tightened his chest. A woman no older than 25. Her skin burned from exposure. Her lips cracked and bleeding. One wrist still bound with rusty wire, the other bruised purple. She did not cry nor call for help. Instead, her voice rasped out, rough and broken, like the last breath of life itself. "Kill me quickly." Jake froze. Because in that moment he understood. Whoever left her here did not simply want her dead. They wanted her to suffer, to die slowly in agony. "Thank you for allowing me the honor of serving you tonight. Tell us where you are listening from. My only wish is that you may always find peace and happiness." Wherever you are hearing this story, Jake did not ask her name. He did not ask who had done this to her. Nor did he ask why they had left her behind in a broken wagon. Out here in this land, many questions had no need for answers, for sometimes the truth was far crueler than anything you could imagine. He simply pulled the canvas back and lifted her carefully into his arms. Her body was light, weightless, as though carrying death itself. His horse snorted uneasily at the scent of dried blood, but Jake tightened the reins and slowly led them both back to his cabin. Jake's house was hardly a home. A log cabin groaned with every gust of wind. The porch thick with dust, doors squeaking on worn hinges, two rotting chairs sat outside, never touched by company. Yet, in the eyes of someone who had just crawled back from death, like Sarah, this place was the safest ground she had known in years. Jake laid an old blanket for her near the stone fireplace. He did not place her on the bed. She did not ask. She curled up like a bird with broken wings, her gaze fixed on the door, as if it might burst open at any moment. Night fell. Jake lit a fire. The Bigfoot hunter had lived alone for years. The flickering light danced across her face, thin, sunburned, lips cracked, eyes filled with both fear and exhaustion. She did not sleep, only lay on her side, breath short and heavy. By morning, Jake set a cup of water and a piece of hard bread before her. She stared at them as though suspecting a trap, but at last she lifted the cup, drinking in small, trembling sips. The bread she broke into crumbs, eating sparingly. And you know there are times when silence becomes the strongest language of all. Jake said nothing, nor did she. Yet the fact that she remained, she did not vanish into the night, was its own answer. Day by day Jake went on as before. Checking his traps, tracking strange footprints in the mud, leaving her water, leaving her bread. It was as if her presence had not shattered the dull rhythm of his life, but instead slipped quietly into it like a new shadow in an old house. And sometimes that simple act of staying meant more than any words of gratitude ever could. A week passed in this way. They did not speak much to each other, only the sound of wind whistling through wooden walls and the dull thud of his boots on the cabin floor as he prepared his hunting gear. Sarah rarely left her corner near the fireplace. She curled tightly under a blanket as though afraid that if she stretched out, some phantom would drag her back into hell. Jake left food beside her, then turned away in silence. She ate little, drank little, but she ate. She drank. And most important of all, she chose to stay. You may not believe it, but sometimes the fact that a person does not leave is a language clear enough. On Saturday morning, the sun not yet high, Jake was splitting firewood behind the house. Each stroke of the axe rang out steady, like a heartbeat that never faltered. He expected no one to share the work, But when he lifted his head, he saw her. Sarah, her tangled hair tied loosely with a strip of torn cloth, her thin shoulders trembling in the chill of dawn. She stood there watching. Then, without a word, she bent to lift a log and set it on the chopping block. Her scarred hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. Jake did not stop her. He simply stepped back half a pace. She swung the axe, clumsy but firm, and the log cracked in two. They split wood together in silence. Two people long emptied of words, finding instead another kind of language. The rhythm of the axe, the crack of breaking wood, the heavy breath shared in the mountain mist. That night, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice so small it seemed she feared to hear it herself. "You never touched me." Jake lifted his head, his steel-gray eyes resting on her face. He gave no answer, only looked. She nodded slightly, as though that silence was all the answer she needed, and for the first time since stepping into this cabin, Sarah finished the bread and drained the cup of water. Afterward, the corners of her lips lifted into a faint smile. Not much, but real. You may have heard the saying, sometimes kindness is not found in promises, but in the things a person chooses not to do, and in that very absence lies a power that can heal more deeply than medicine. Peace never lasted long in this wilderness. It was only a fragile shadow before the wind shifted again. One early morning, Jake led his horse from the makeshift stable and saw fresh tracks pressed into the mud. Deep grooves, still damp, ran along the eastern tree line. They were not his, nor from any townsfolk. Strangers had passed through. Jake knelt, touching the soil still soft beneath his fingers. The morning wind stung his eyes with mountain air. But in his heart, he already knew. The storm of the past was coming back for him. Inside, Sarah sat close to the fire. She rubbed her wrist where old scars cut deep, never fading. For the first time, Jake looked closely. Carved into her skin with something sharp were 3 crooked letters, BK. Not everyone knew that mark, but Jake had seen it before. Years ago, outside a saloon in Deadwood, a drunken man had flashed the same scar on his wrist, laughing proudly about deeds no decent man should ever speak of. That day, Jake turned his back. He had stayed silent. And now that silence had returned to haunt him in the form of this broken woman. Night fell. Sarah sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the door. Her voice rasped low. "I cannot sleep. Something feels wrong." Jake gave no reply. He simply drew his Colt revolver, cleaning it slowly, each motion precise and familiar. When he slid the barrel back into its leather holster, Sarah's trembling hand reached out, resting lightly on his, only for a moment, but enough. Jake understood. She knew who waited out there. And she knew this time, he would not turn away. Perhaps you have felt that way too. Knowing you once ignored something cruel and realizing the moment had come when you could no longer look away. Outside, the night pressed heavy and dark. But Jake Morrison had made his choice. He would not let silence claim another life. Thank you for being here with me. If this story stirs memories of the old days, dusty evenings, hoofbeats echoing in your heart, subscribe to my channel so that each day we may sit together once more and I will share with you another tale of the Wild West. Jake Morrison had never been a man of many words. He knew the weight of a gun, the distance a horse could run, the tracks of creatures both human and otherwise. But he also knew silence could kill faster than a bullet. The next morning, he saddled his horse and rode slowly into town. Deadwood looked the same as always. Mud caked thick on the main street. The saloon doors hanging open. The twang of a piano drifting into the morning air. Jake needed no greeting, no company. He simply sat and listened. The talk in town was the same. 4 young women had vanished in the past 3 months. 2 from Black Hills, 1 from Rapid City, and 1 from nearby. No one had seen, no one had heard. The sheriff shrugged it off. No witnesses, no trace. His voice as dry as if he were speaking of a stray horse gone missing. Jake only nodded, thanked him, and rode away. But inside, something had cracked. Have you ever felt it? That moment when you hear something terrible and you know deep down if you stay silent then you are guilty too. That evening Sarah saw him at the table taking apart his Winchester piece by piece, wiping each part clean with care. The oil lamp cast its glow across his weathered face, the scars of sun and wind, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the barrel. Softly she asked, "Where are you going?" Jake did not look up. His voice was low, steady, like wind whispering through a canyon. Sometimes evil needs to be reminded that someone is still watching. The fire snapped in the fireplace. Sarah said nothing. Then she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his calloused fingers. Just a moment, but enough. Jake understood. This time, he was not riding out only for justice. He was riding for her, for the silence he once carried, now given a chance to be set right. Nightfall. Jake tightened the saddle straps, tucked an extra box of cartridges into his leather pouch. He was no longer the quiet Bigfoot hunter tracking mysterious creatures in the wilderness. He mounted his horse and rode into the darkness, following the trail of strangers' hoofprints toward the deep canyon where legends said both monsters and men dwelt in shadow. The canyon was draped in darkness, thick as a heavy blanket. Jake Morrison tied his horse beneath a low pine branch, keeping the animal from neighing and giving him away. He followed the narrow trail, moving slowly toward the faint flicker of firelight. Between jagged cliffs stood a crooked wooden shack, smoke curling from a bent chimney. Rough laughter spilled out, mingled with the clink of bottles. Jake stood still in the shadows, listening. That voice, he had heard it years ago in Deadwood, the drunken bragging of men who treated evil as a game. He waited until the laughter dulled, until whiskey began to drag their eyelids down. The shack door burst open. Jake charged in, slamming the butt of his revolver into the chest of the nearest man. The drunk collapsed before he even realized what had struck him. Another reached for his belt, but before the knife cleared leather, a gunshot roared, the bullet shattering the oil lamp hanging from the beam. Light exploded into fire and smoke, filling the room. Through the haze, shadows blurred, but the heavy thud of Jake's boots echoed loud and certain. A third man froze, dropped his knife to the floor, and lifted both hands high. No plea for mercy, only silence. A silence far heavier than weeping. In the corner, a figure shrank away. A young woman, hair matted with dirt, dress in tatters, eyes wide with terror. Jake stripped off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders, pulling her to her feet. Before leaving, he stopped, his voice cold and gravelly. "She was never yours. She will never be yours. And if I hear of this again, there will not be a second warning." No one answered. Only the crackle of fire on the table, casting pale light on ashen faces. Jake guided the girl outside, lifted her onto his horse. The night was black, the canyon wind cutting sharp in his ears. He rode straight for Deadwood. The sheriff sat behind his desk, about to grumble some complaint until Jake dropped a blood-stained dress and a broken knife onto the table. Evidence enough to chain any man. The sheriff's face drained of color. This time, the law could not look away. Have you ever seen it? That moment when a man does not need to shout, but lets his actions speak instead. That is the kind of silence that commands an entire room. That dawn was not like the others. The sun had not yet risen, but the wind off the mountains carried a strange dust, heavy with the smell of horse sweat and human fear. Jake Morrison stepped onto the porch, his eyes sweeping the tree line. Dark specks were moving. Many specks, and then they stretched into a long line. The BTK gang, they had come. The pounding of hooves rolled closer, the ground trembling beneath. Inside the cabin, Sarah clutched an old blanket to her chest. The fear on her face needed no explanation. Jake rested his Winchester across the porch rail, his gaze cold as mountain stone. Have you ever felt that moment when you know you cannot run, cannot retreat, when the only choice left is to stand your ground and hold on to the little piece of land that is yours? The riders stormed in, dust exploding around them. More than a dozen men, faces wrapped in bandanas, revolvers dangling at their sides. The one in front growled, "Hand her over, Morrison. Do not let your cabin soak in blood." Jake did not move. He shifted back half a step, just enough to tap his boot against the wooden floor. Behind him, in the abandoned equipment shed, a hidden flame leapt into fire. He was ready. When the gang spurred their horses forward, Jake pulled the trigger. The first shot was not aimed at a man, but at the oil barrel hanging from the shed beam. Fire erupted, smoke pouring thick across the yard. Horses shrieked in terror, bucking and throwing their riders to the ground. Screams tangled with the thunder of hooves. The wall of fire and smoke turned the yard into a battlefield of shadows. Jake moved like one himself, each shot precise, driving the gang backward. In the chaos, he seized the lieutenant, a pockmarked brute with the letters BTK carved into his wrist. One swift move and the man crashed down, bound tight to the wooden beam with the very rope he carried. The rest saw their second-in-command howling, and they pulled back, retreating with their horses. They knew the fight was no longer theirs to win. Flames roared in the cabin yard, black smoke rising against the red glow of dawn. Sarah ran from the house, eyes glistening. Jake gave a slight nod, then turned back to tighten the ropes on the captured man. The outlaw stammered and begged, but Jake gave no reply. Some men only stop when their whole gang is dragged into the light. And sometimes justice begins with a man who dares to hold his porch against the storm. The fire and smoke faded, leaving the bitter smell of ash clinging to the old porch. The BTK lieutenant was dragged away in chains, forced to give the names of every man in the gang. This time the sheriff did not dare look away. The law, slow and reluctant, finally stirred to life. Jake Morrison returned to the cabin by late afternoon. The sky burned gold, dust still hanging in the air. On the porch, Sarah stood clutching her blanket, eyes fixed on him. No tears, no questions, only a look as if for the first time in her life, she believed that not all men were cruel. Jake stepped up onto the porch, removing his hat. Their eyes met. No words passed. Yet sometimes silence speaks louder than 1,000 promises. The days slowly fell back into rhythm. Sarah began tending a small patch of garden out back, planting a few seeds she had carried since childhood. She brushed the horse's mane, no longer trembling when her hands touched the reins. One afternoon, Jake heard her humming an old folk tune as she swept the porch, her voice faint but steady. He said nothing, only stood at a distance and listened. At the breakfast table, there were now always 2 cups, one for him, one for her. That small detail alone gave the empty cabin a breath of life. They did not share a bed. Sarah kept the small room across the hall. Yet in the evenings, when they sat together on the porch, sharing a pot of coffee beneath a sky filled with stars, their quiet companionship felt closer than any words of affection could. One evening, as the crimson sunset melted behind the mountains, Sarah asked softly, "Why did you come back for me?" Jake was silent for a long moment. Then his voice, low and gravelly, answered, "Because someone had to." She nodded, nothing more. But the faint smile that touched her lips said everything. You see, life does not always give us what we deserve. But sometimes it gives us someone who sees that we deserve more. And a single look like that can change the rest of a life. Jake never asked Sarah how long she would stay. She made no promises of tomorrow. But each morning she walked out the door, and each evening she came back again. Love, it turns out, does not always come like fire. Sometimes it arrives gently, like rain on an old wooden roof. A chance to forgive, a chance to begin again. So, what would you do if one day someone knocked on your door carrying scars the world had chosen to forget? Would you turn away, or open the door and save a part of yourself? The Bigfoot hunter had spent years tracking creatures in the shadows, but the greatest monster he ever faced wore a human face. And the greatest mystery he ever solved was not about giant footprints in the mud, but about the footprints we leave on each other's hearts. Sometimes the most dangerous hunt is the one that leads us back to our own humanity. In the wilderness, Jake had learned to read signs, broken branches, disturbed earth, the subtle marks that revealed which way a creature had gone. But Sarah had taught him to read different signs, the way silence could heal, the way presence could speak louder than words, the way 2 broken souls could find wholeness in each other's shadows. The mountains kept their secrets, as mountains always do. But in a small cabin where a Bigfoot hunter and a rescued woman shared quiet mornings and starlit evenings, a different kind of legend was being written. Not in ancient footprints or whispered folklore, but in the simple, daily choice to stay, to trust, to believe that even in the Wild West, kindness could be the strongest force of all. That if this story has stirred something in you, do not hesitate to leave your mark. Press like, press subscribe, For here in these tales of the old frontier, we remember that the greatest hunts are not for creatures hiding in the wilderness, but for the courage hiding within ourselves.